Hey, Miguel back here on the CRP, and I'm joined by Chadillac. We are going to talk a little bit more Masvidal versus Diaz fallout. Obviously, the UFC 244 went down this past weekend at Madison Square Garden in New York City on pay-per-view. The BMF belt on the line. Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz, and the fight went into the third round, ended the third round. Then the doctors didn't allow the fourth round to go down. So it's been a lot of negative, rhetoric after that. How they didn't let the fight go on, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's added a little bit of taint to what was a great fight. Chad, what'd you think?
Well, okay. Well, the first thing, talk about the controversy of not letting the fight go on. Right after the fight, Joe Rogan said, "This is MMA, not boxing. They need to know the difference." And I'm not sure I agree with that statement so much. Because, okay, they had Nate's cut controlled. I agree with that. Nate was clearly ready to go. I agree with that. And I agree that they should have let the fight go on. In an MMA, strictly, they would have. But you and I remember what it was like when George Masvidal very first started fighting in the AFC in Florida at Fort Lauderdale at the War Memorial. And we had to deal with Boxing Commission coming in. And they wouldn't let us use our referees, so we had to use the Boxing Commission's referees, and they had no clue. One night, Sarah LaRosa almost got killed by Jennifer House, and I was so furious that I was screaming at the referee because he didn't stop the fight because he didn't understand what he was looking at. And I think we saw a little bit of that with New York and Madison Square Garden and all of that. But at the same time, maybe at this point, with everything we know about head trauma now that we didn't before, could they be right?
It was a bad cut.
It was a bad cut. Very bad.
Was it worse than Tyson Fury's cut? Go back a couple of weeks, and he fought, through an entire fight, cut really badly where people were worried about it getting stopped and things, but somehow it went on. Mike actually speculated that maybe that took a bag of money, hey, commission, let it go on, make sure the doctor gets some of that or whatever it is. Now, Obviously, there's that's complete speculation, but
sure.
But it's part of the judgment call that goes on around the events, because if we recently had a world heavyweight title fight, you could say, well, Tyson Fury's not a world heavyweight champion right now, but he's the heavyweight with the most attention on him, right? So we had a major heavyweight fight that they let go on under similar circumstances where this one got called off. So there is a judgment call to it. The thing about Nate is it's a double-edged sword, right? Because he does cut, so he knows that, he knows he cuts. He's used to fighting bloody. He doesn't care. So, yeah, but, is there come a point where, one more punch takes a piece of skin, like a large piece of skin hanging off there, and then you're turning it into a situation where, you're beyond just a normal cut, So I don't know, I don't know exactly. I'm not a doctor, right? So, but I look at that cut. A lot of it was below the eye. A portion of it was above the eye. At one point I was worried he was bleeding from the ear, but it seemed to be a superficial cut on the side of the ear. If he's bleeding from inside the ear, stop it immediately, But
but that wasn't the case.
No, it wasn't. But I think the doctor had a lot to pay attention to in this fight, and I think at some point, you pay them to do, and they don't get paid a lot or anything like that. But his job is to make a call, based on his experience and stuff. So he, maybe he never watched an Nate Diaz fight before. So, on your average fighter, most people would be okay with the stops. But Nate's been there before. So to me, the problem is the whole circus atmosphere and the whole way they hype the fight. It's okay that Nate and Masvidal are talking about being the baddest motherfucker and everything like that. But to actually create a belt, and Dana make a phone call and bring his friend, The Rock in, like they have Thanksgiving dinner together.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, so two moguls of some type or another get together to help hype their event or whatever. And you got The Rock, completely out of place with his eyebrow doing stupid shit, and literally because he's a PG icon now, having to say the baddest the baddest mother effer. It's like the baddest mother effer. Say motherfucker. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
say motherfucker.
It's like, but yeah, all to me, it all just seems so contrived that it's just not appealing. None of that was cool. I think what George and Nate gave us in the ring, that's kind of what, the whole thing is about. They did their job. They did a great job. All the other stuff is stupid bells and whistles. I think the fighters kind of showed that at the end of the day, too. And, we'll see. And, but that's how things get hyped nowadays. Mixed martial entertainment, like they said.
Yeah, I love that. Our friend of the show, and he's got his own podcast, Mike Davis, longtime MMA legend. He's been around forever. Cutthroat Fight Gear, I think he started with. So I've known Mike for, God, man, going on 20 years now. I guess that's crazy, but yeah, Mike, like you said, Mike coined the term mixed martial entertainment. And I think that's exactly what we got. I don't know. I'm okay with it. I mean, at least we got good fights. I mean, it's about time.
No, yeah, the fights
we've seen recently have been pretty lackluster, to say the least. Now, we've had some great ones, but if you take the full card and you watch it compared to what Diaz and Masvidal did, that was amazing. I mean, it was just everything about that, the build up to it. Masvidal is the most famous MMA fighter in the world right now. He's bigger than Conor McGregor. Imagine, would you have thought that 6 months ago?
Yeah, 6 years ago. The problem with me is people will say I'm high, and I was, but it's okay. The point is I sort of saw that 16 years ago. I mean, the kid had, even with losses and stuff, had a way of wanting to come back, had a way of learning, and the people from the Avalons who he started with, on through to now where he is with American Top Team, the people he always associated with himself with were always very good people. They always took care of him, and he always reacted well to a mentor.
Yeah.
He was very mentorable. He's not one of those street guys that, is running off doing his other stuff. As long as he had focus and things like that, he was very focused on what he wanted, right? So yeah, when he was with Bodog, there were certain contracts that you get criticized for. But if you look at, he was one of the guys that got a contract, and I'll tell you, it was 4 fights, $100K flat, so it was $25K a fight. It was a good raise for him, but no raises for more than a year. No raises. So go market, and hopefully the money comes in, and then you've got a nice flat line on what you're spending on fighters, right?
Yeah.
And he was motivated by it because, and he got the fights in about a year.
Knocked out Eve Edwards.
When you make 100 G's in a year at a certain level of fighter, that is a difference maker. You can make it through a year without having to also do other jobs. And that was a breakthrough for him and stuff like that. But he didn't get that contract just for no reason. The fact is, he always had potential.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at the Bodog days, let's go back even further and look at the Absolute Fighting Championship days, which was at the War Memorial in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which you match made for. You were basically single-handedly responsible for making that happen. That was a spin-off of an Indiana show, and that you match made for. And you kind of said to the owner of American Top Team, Dan Lambert, look, for what you're spending, we could do a better show in your hometown. I mean, you're flying these guys up on your private jet. Just for what you're spending on that, I could do a better show in your hometown. And we found the War Memorial, and everything went from there. And then Florida became the second boxing commission to accept MMA as a real legitimate sport, which that was growing pains. Like that was painful. That was very painful. dealing with those guys, the arrogance of boxing and how they belittled MMA and looked down upon it was something that a lot of people that they couldn't even, you can't possibly even understand it now if you weren't there for it then. But the way they were so condescending and, well, it's something, but it's not the sweet science. I heard that several times and just wanted to smack people. And the UFC, the very first UFC, the guy comes out with the one glove on, the boxer, and got smashed in 20 seconds or whatever it was. I don't remember his name now. I probably should know that, but I've forgotten more than I remember. So anyways, my point is that they treated it like it was a circus sideshow act when it wasn't. And now it's kind of become, in a lot of ways, as you're pointing out, as Davis pointed out, we should have him on this, and we should have him back, and we should talk about exactly what the term he coins at some point soon. But it is kind of becoming a sideshow act, and that started with the Ronda Rousey Conor McGregor thing, and Chael Sonnen nailed it the other day perfectly. He said Conor McGregor is the next Ronda Rousey. Once people figured out how to beat him, it's just kind of done. He's a one-trick pony. And I don't know. I want to see if that happens. Conor McGregor sends a tweet out that says he wants a 3-piece with a soda and a side of chicken. And I look at how George threw Nate around, and Nate kind of threw Conor around like that. So Conor better be really stepping it up. I mean, Conor's probably realistically 5'8", and he's probably walking around at 170 pounds.
Conor's next fight has been set. It's set. It's signed. He's
okay. They've signed it now. I just read this morning, so I'm going off.
He's fighting Cerrone. It looks like.
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. Besides that, though, he sent out a tweet. I'm commenting on the tweet he sent out, I guess.
I think, and I understand that. And I think, there are a couple of things. There's a lot that you said there to digest. First of all, one of the things about, maybe the comeuppance of boxing, I think it showed itself yesterday in spades, for the MMA side. And, the Masvidal Diaz main event was going on, and the Canelo Alvarez versus Kovalev fight was also just about ready to go on, and they sat and waited for the UFC's main event. There are pictures of both fighters lying around with their gloves on backstage, before the fight. Yep. And Dana was also talking about how, hey, they made calls and they actually showed the live Masvidal Diaz fight to the public in the MGM Grand so they wouldn't be bored while they waited. So everybody was standing around and waiting and stuff, and they did boxing. Mike said, to use the term bend the knee. So boxing did come in second yesterday to the whole Masvidal stuff. So there is something to be said for that circus atmosphere. But to me, the problem is sustainability. And then you set yourself up for a big fall rather than have a nice, consistent product. I don't know that this fight needed, all that much more hype and a BMF. If the fighters are talking BMF belt, let them talk about it. Let them hype it up. Let their crowds, go. Let people make replica belts. But under no circumstances would my company make a belt that says BMF on it.
Yeah, and, that's pretty classless.
Because the thing is now what happens? The belt, with both guys, you do have some legit, I'll present you with some interesting twists, right? It's like you have some legit American street cred right there, right?
Yep.
Diaz is a bad boy, Masvidal's a bad boy, you got West Coast, you got East Coast, but it's America, And so who's a bad motherfucker, that you're going to get, that you're going to put in there with street cred like that for that belt? Well, maybe in America, I thought of Eddie Alvarez. I mean, Philly street shit. He's got 3 fights. Eddie would have been in that mix, maybe. But how do you argue with, if Khabib comes in and goes, dude, I was 10, fighting with gorillas and machine guns and shit for my life in a civil war. the little American street cred. You punk some guy, in a place where at some point cops are going to stop it. There's no danger like Khabib's had danger. Do you really want to get into a world street cred kind of shit? And I don't want any of that politics involved with that.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not the sport. So this is why that was a fucking idiotic idea to do the BMF belt. It's like street cred, okay, but it's again, balance out street cred for me.
Okay, so tell me this then, Miguel. Is it a one-off, or do they continue to do this?
Yeah, I never want to see the belt again, except in George's, trophy case. I never want to hear it again. I don't want to see The Rock again.
I don't want to see the fucking Rock in there. I don't want to see Trump. I don't give a shit about any of that.
Not even the WWE has like a complete sideshow belt. I guess they do nowadays, right? But like even regional belts are regional belts. This is not a regional belt. This is a baddest motherfucker. This is a fictional title. This is a nothing title. And I think the truth is, if you look at Diaz and you look at Masvidal, they're the ones that said it, but they also know it was worthless. It was for the hype. This was about what happened in the ring. You know what I mean? And that's what they wanted to prove. And I think there's still something left to write there and finish the story.
Yeah. McGregor sending out the tweet that he wants the 3-piece and the soda thing is so ridiculous because Nate pretty much threw Conor around as he felt like it. And I understand that Conor's grown a lot physically since then. It's been, 3 years or whatever it's been now. But, Masvidal threw Nate around like he was a rag doll. I mean, he ragdolled him. He picked him up and threw him around the way DC did Dan Henderson, of all people, the first time when they fought. I couldn't believe that. I was on the fence about DC. I knew he was really good, but I didn't know that when he did that to Hendo and just literally ragdolled him and just picked him up over his head and boom, and just slammed him like it was nothing. And that's what Masvidal did to Diaz. And it just showed the difference in power and technique and skill set, but in the difference between a guy who's really bigger and has just continually grown as a man and a guy who's a tall, thin guy who's just never going to put on a lot of muscle mass. Now, that doesn't mean that Nate couldn't knock him out or anything, but George was walking through Nate's punches for the most part. And, I think at one point in the third round, he got maybe stung a little bit, but he was never, ever in danger. And Nate was in danger from the first 30 seconds until that referee stopped the fight of being finished. And I mean, severe danger. There were a couple times where I was like, they're getting ready to stop the fight. And I was a little bit surprised that the referee wasn't closer into it. But when I rewatched it, I was like, yeah, the referee was paying attention, and Nate was getting hit a lot and hard, and he got ragdolled. So, McGregor, if Nate ragdolls McGregor, what does he even possibly have for Masvidal? It's ridiculous, other than money. But I mean, Masvidal looks at that and goes, I can make a lot of money on that fight. By the way, have you heard how the pay-per-views went yet?
No, that'll be an interesting number to hear. That'll come later this week.
That's got to be great. The pay-per-view has to be amazing for this.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm thinking it'll be a top 5 UFC pay-per-view. We'll see if they crack the top 5. McGregor, he's not a factor anymore. He's a tweeter, and he got off with a slap on the wrist for punching the old man. That went down this weekend, so
yeah,
he's not gonna have to do jail time there. And he's talking about Cerrone in January, I believe, is the date that's been set. So he's off on that. Hopefully Cerrone gets the job done and puts him away. That's just my own personal opinion, but he's trying to insert himself into the conversation. What was interesting to me was in the post-fight conferences, Dana White, because Masvidal said, hey, I'm a dog. I don't like the way this ended. He's conscious. I want to run it back. And I think Nate said run it right back. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
immediately as soon as I heal.
Yeah, they both were like matchmaking right away, and they wanted to go there. And Dana shit on that.
Yep.
You know, and the interesting thing to me is Dana. I think, let's see what he's got up his sleeve. I mean, Dana's an icon for a reason, right? And I think he's got something up his sleeve for George, for the winner, for George in this case. And he said, there are big things to come, big things to come. And headlining London against Leon Edwards would be another big payday, and that is where the three-piece, comes from, sort of thing.
Yep.
To the point where that fight would be more meaningful to do in London at this point than a McGregor fight for Masvidal.
I would agree with that. With that.
So with that in mind, McGregor's off the radar, and he can get a win, and then maybe we can talk about him again. But for right now, I want to see what he does in his next performance, because I've seen him beat up old men. I've seen him talk his ear off, my ear off, everybody's ear off. Show me, it's at that point. It's been, he's starting to spend too much within fights, between fights. At some point, some of these guys are going to look up and they're going to say, maybe I would have been better off fighting at least one more time between when I was 29 and 31 in the prime and peak of my powers, right? Instead of starting to take 18-month layoffs and stuff where, you don't get that time back as an athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. So, especially as a fighter, Evander Holyfield's talking about making a comeback.
That's crazy. His son just fought. His son made his debut.
I'm just using as an example. You hear these things and you go, I don't really want to see that. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Evander at 52 or 53,
would you
whatever
do
it is.
Diaz again? Would you rerun it right back, or do you hold off? What do you do?
Oh, I would immediately run Diaz and Masvidal back. I would stay on this hype. I would, when I pulled up YouTube today, every single thing on it, and I mean everything, was Masvidal. And then there were underneath that, then the Diaz stuff kind of came. But even like the music I usually listen to, the news I watch, all of the other stuff, all of that was superseded in every single character and every thumbnail with Masvidal stuff. Old fights with Masvidal fighting when Kimbo Slice used to have his backyard fights where George got his start at. Jorge, George, whatever you want to call him. He doesn't care. I watched some of his old fights again, and I remember watching 30-second clips on your phone in Florida and you saying, check out this kid. We're going to bring him in to fight in the AFC. And I was like, is he fighting in a backyard? And you were like, yeah, it's a thing they do in Miami. We try to kind of ignore it. Because back then, we were trying to legitimize the sport. And so nobody wanted to talk about all the backyard and gym fights that we had, because that delegitimized what we were trying to do. And it made us look like a circus sideshow act. And we were trying to go, no, we're a real sport. We're professionals. We want to be taken seriously. And now we're back to, we've come full circle, and hey, we're entertainment, like Mike Davis said, mixed martial arts entertainment. It's a whole different level of what we were doing. It reminds me a lot of the stupid shit I used to do to sell local tickets back in the day. I had triplets one time fight. And I had triplets. They were identical triplets. I had the one triplet referee and the other two fight each other because the one didn't want to fight. But the other two fought like cats and dogs their whole lives. They were bigger than the third one. He was kind of the runt of the litter of the triplets. And I brother versus brother, and I had a north and south theme to it, and it was crazy. And it sold tons of tickets. I mean, I sold the place completely out. So I was that bad promoter that was trying to do the circus sideshow act because I was local, and by 2006, there was so much competition. Everybody in the world thought they knew how to promote. And so you had to do something unusual to catch people's attention at that point. And so I kind of went away from just legitimate fights and started doing any kind of crazy thing I could think of to do that sold tickets. And I think that's what the UFC is doing right now. And it proves effective, just like you said. I mean, Canelo is sitting there waiting for the UFC to finish, not the other way around. And if that doesn't say, you know, kiss the ring, there's a new king in town, nothing does. I remember Keith Palmer one time, it's a local boxing guy around here. I'm sure he watches the show once in a while. Well respected, and Keith's a great guy, very smart, very educated. Keith said at one point, well, if boxing isn't proven dead and MMA isn't the new sport now, I don't know what could make it look more dead and MMA more alive. And that was in 2005 when The Ultimate Fighter came out, and Indianapolis suddenly had 6 different MMA shows in a weekend in Indianapolis, Indiana. You know, yeah. There wasn't a boxing show around and hadn't been for I don't even know when. You know, the Boxing Commission was begging to become the commission and get in on it, which didn't happen until 2008, 2009 here, technically. So, you know, it just goes to show.
Did you catch who was in George's corner?
Did I what?
Did you catch who George's cornermen were?
Well, it was Mike Brown wasn't he?
Yeah, Mike Brown was the main corner, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. But who else are you talking about?
Yeah, he was
Gracie.
No, he was joined by a celebrity corner.
Oh, who was the celebrity? Oh, I mean, Cron Gracie was in Nate's corner. Sorry.
So anyway, so the point is this. Let me go full circle around. So Muhammad Ali passed away now a few years back, about 2 years.
Rest in peace, champ.
So when Muhammad Ali passed away, this, you know, now there's the open argument of who's the greatest living fighter now, you know, and you know, Sugar Ray Leonard. There's an ample choice of several guys, but most people will go with Roberto Duran.
Oh yeah. Of course, I saw that. Yeah.
And I found that interesting because there you've got maybe perhaps the greatest living fighter at the MMA show, while Canelo, the #1 draw in boxing, and his cokehead manager, you know, Oscar, are sitting in Vegas in a facade at this point, because I don't think, you know, they have been fond of telling us since Mayweather went away that they're the #1 draw in boxing, and I don't think that they're going to be bigger than the heavyweight division is in 2020. This has been probably their last hurrah.
You may be right on that, and you know, remember when DAZN first came out 6 or 8 months ago, whatever it was, almost a year now, I guess, really. We talked about that on the Cage Rage podcast, and we were saying on the CRP that, you know, we'll see if DAZN has legs. You know, they say they've got a $300 million war chest or whatever it was, and let's see what they have. Let's see if they put their money where their mouth is, and let's see if they can really compete. And part of the problem is boxing is just not as exciting as a bad motherfucker belt. You know, I mean, how can you really argue that? Really? I mean, if you had to pick, okay, between the Alvarez fight or watching Masvidal and Diaz, which one would you have watched? If you had to pick only one and could never see the other ever, which would you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, employment aside, or if you're being paid to, if it was personal choice, I would have stuck with the MMA for this weekend. And you know, it's not a terrific sign again for the boxing side. But boxing will always have their purists and the people that follow it. But I do think that we saw several instances that indicate that MMA has surpassed boxing. I think Dana's comfort as he, you know, aims to enter boxing in the near future, too, shows that they're in a pretty strong spot, and that the boxing model is the one that's looking at how the UFC does things and seeing what they can adapt. Now, in general, you know, I mean, the bottom line is I think that they both absolutely suck at splitting the pie up. You know what I mean? I think that that both sports are rife with middlemen all the way down the line, and that the fighters get a small percentage of the pie. And I think that that's what makes it interesting for both to delve into each other and see if they're going to be, there's actually a way to make more money. That's the hope that the zone brings, is that the zone is an X factor that brings you, a certain amount of money to paycheck, from paycheck to paycheck and things like that. That's, next level money. It's not the same old paycheck that, that people have been delving out, or it's like, hey, you'll get a percentage of the pay-per-views. So people don't buy pay-per-views anymore. It's like, ask Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz how they did on their pay-per-view.
Right.
On their big percentage of pay-per-view recently. You know what I mean? It's a situation where, we saw how Bellator used that with the Eddie Alvarez contract. Well, they'll say, yeah, we'll match their contract. We'll do what UFC does. We'll do a pay-per-view. You'll get a percentage of it. Exactly like that. Except for you don't sell any pay-per-views, and the business of the UFC is to sell pay-per-views.
Yeah.
So but you can muddy the waters. And that's what's going to be interesting about the zone now. So, what do you do next with Canelo? Now that we're off on, Masvidal, like I said, I'd like to see him fight Leon or Diaz again. Those are the two fights I'd like to see him fight in the immediate fallout. With Diaz, there's another X factor there we haven't talked about. Then we can circle around and talk a little bit about Canelo too. But didn't you get that feeling that if George beat Nate, anybody who knows the story here knows that Nate's got a big brother.
Oh yeah, that was definitely the. Does Nick come back and say, okay, now you forced me to come out of retirement and show you how it's done? Because Nate,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'll give you the floor back. But under those circumstances, then I think you got to keep the BMF belt around. It's
absolutely.
So it's an interesting thing, but I'll let you run with it because the Nate Nick aspect is something that we could still get. They could redo the fight if Masvidal does it again, so to speak. Then you could still get Nick coming back. And I think Nick has always been like the more marketable of the two Diaz brothers. Maybe that's not the case anymore because I think Nate is actually the more approachable and like the more of a quote machine. I think Nick's more, to himself and humble, and I think he's the guy who has the social anxiety a little more. You know what I mean? If he hasn't smoked his pot and stuff like that, he'd rather not have to deal with interviews and people and stuff. And I can understand that. You know what I mean? But the point is I think Masvidal and Nick at the end of 2020 becomes a titanic fight for the UFC.
That becomes the biggest fight in the world. That could surpass, Brock Lesnar, and it could surpass anything Rousey, Lesnar, McGregor, any of the huge
McGregor's going to be tough to beat.
Names have done. That could be, Nick's return. But man, he's been gone a long time.
He has been gone a long time, and the thing.
I mean, he's been gone 5 years. That's
that's no joke. But the thing is, I don't know. There's something about him that he's been gone, but has he really been gone? In terms of, I think he just hasn't been fighting, but I think he's still living the life of a fighter.
He's still training and
he's immersed in it. He's taking care of himself. He's looking at guys and techniques and trying to pick a spot because, he's not going to come back and fight, for 20 and 20. So, and I mean, it's just life and circumstances at this point. So something's got to be worth his while, and maybe avenging the family name and stuff like that. I could see them working that one to be really big. And, I mean, to me, if I had to say possibly the greatest moment in MMA to me was when Nick was fighting Anderson Silva and just laid down in front of him. Like, are you going to fight and lay down? I mean, it was unexpected and stuff, and the guy's an artist, So, yeah, I think that type of appeal, 5 years, yeah. He's a guy who's going to probably, be 60 and look at his bank account and be like, fuck, there could have been a couple more zeros there.
Yeah.
I spent my whole prime not fighting, you know. But the Diaz brothers have the catch, you know, where they can come in and grab it in droves. You know what I mean? It's like I don't think they have to do all that huge work of a comeback. I think their comeback is just a story itself. So I think Nick versus George becomes, you know, something that we can put on the radar for 2020 and see if it comes to fruition. But I think that's the end game. I think you get to that, and you're milking this cow real well.
Yeah, you know, and let's not forget, this isn't a lightweight fight. This is a welterweight fight. So that's an enormous difference in and of itself. I mean, we're not talking about the little guys. We're talking about your average guy. And Nick looked like when he walked out with Nate behind him, for the small moment that I actually got to see him, he looked like he was about 185 pounds. So, you know, he's grown up, he's matured as a man. And he's still doing triathlons, and he's still doing marathons, and, you know, he's still training every day. They're still in the gym every day training. You know, it's not like he hasn't been doing jiu-jitsu every day. It's not like he hasn't been doing his Muay Thai and wrestling every day. He's still doing all of that. He just runs a mercantile store. You know, he sells marijuana in California now, in the Stockton area, and they're very, very successful with that. So he doesn't need the money, and he said openly, you know, people can talk smack about loving to fight, but I hate fighting. I hate the whole thing. I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a guy that
they're probably
yeah, at some point he feels like he has to fight, honor, family. You know, he comes from that type of makeup. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's kind of what they would like to tap. And, you know, with George, you know, George is going to give him, you know, George, I don't think will be the first one to be disrespectful. I mean, maybe he'll do something and they'll twist it around or whatever they'll do. You know, like, you know, could they say he was disrespectful after this fight? I don't think so. You know what I mean? I think
he could sure call him out. He could say, hey, isn't there anybody else? Is there no one else left?
Yeah,
and Nick could be standing in the corner with Nate.
Right now, you don't get the Nick fight. You got to do Nate second time.
Right, of course. So it doesn't sound like Dana has that in mind.
Yeah, Dana
doesn't like Nate. That's part of the problem.
Well, here's the thing: is those guys always present him trouble. You don't know how negotiations are going to go with those guys.
Yeah,
and then they give you outs. Like, I mean, yeah. He doesn't show up at a press conference. Yeah, you can cancel the fight, but at the end of the day, yeah, Nick, they don't get their payday, this, that, and the other stuff. But again, they don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? So it's like
they have money.
They're not homeless either, right? So it's like they don't. So at the end of the day, the people that look the worst for that are the UFC and the UFC brass, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So Nick and Nate have always kept them off guard in negotiations. So we're going to see how this one goes. You know, with George. They already have. I think Leon Edwards becomes the interesting option there. I'll give you another option. I think this was more fantasy land, but since we're having a good conversation here, why not turn the BMF belt into a 165-pound title?
Now, see, there you go. The problem with that is the UFC, if they do that, then they've got a whole nother class they have to open up. They've got a whole nother class they have to pay.
They've got a couple of guys who move up, a couple of guys who, you know, from 170 who'd stay there. And then you got, you know, 175-pound division with Usman and et cetera, however, you know, Covington and everybody there that you want to move up there. So, you know, if there was ever a chance to do it, and you do it, you know, because what happens to me here, you know, you're looking for an artful way to do it. First of all, it inaugurates it with a lot of attention. And then what are you combating? The fact is you're not doing it with guys rated in the top 5 of either weight class. Maybe George is at this point, but Nate can't be rated, right? So
he's been gone too long.
He's been, you know, and George, for all, you know, our love for him is, I think, 2-2 in his last 4, right? So you could argue that there are, you know, guys sitting around waiting for title shots. You know, Tony Ferguson would probably be like, "Hey, what about me?" You know, Leon Edwards would probably be like, what about me? You know,
Yeah.
there are a lot of guys. But for name recognition to inaugurate a weight class, I think you couldn't do any better than that name value of Masvidal and Diaz right now. So I think that supplants it. And then, I mean, the bottom line to me is I, had the opportunity to work with several organizations and start to work with champions. And my theory was always crown the champions immediately. Get them, get the titles in people's hands as fast as possible. And better contenders will come. The champs will start losing, and you just start making the fights. But get the belts out there and in rotation. When they're vacant, they're completely useless.
Yep. When you look at friend of the show, Jonathan Ivey, when you look at his rankings right now, he just released his CFC rankings. And I was looking at him the other day, and I went, vacant, 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 vacant. I would have those filled no matter what. Whoever was the number one ranked would be wearing the belt, period. Because that brings the wolves out. The belt is what brings the wolves out, not a number one ranking, not a vacated belt. The wolves come out for the belt. That's what they want.
And they're on a smaller level, there's management that goes into the small shows. Obviously, you're aware of it. Maybe he has vacant belts because, on a budget level to, buy a belt.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not saying anything bad about.
But getting back to the
I'm
UFC,
just saying that's the reality of what that is, though.
Absolutely. And get back to the UFC's version of it here. This is an artful way to just move forward with what everybody wants and not really get criticized for being purists up until now. It's like they don't consider it, and then all of a sudden they put it on as a people. But I think they would get away with it, so to speak, and nobody would say, hey, gotcha, we were right, you were wrong. There's no need to get into that. Just do it. Just do it, and let's move on and move the weight classes to 65, 75. And George, and
just go 10 pounds.
And here's the other thing about it. You got guys out there right now. I think Uriah Faber's one. And you've got a couple other guys. I'm not thinking clearly or at the top. Super sharp, but guys like. Who just came close to the title picture and never got a title. Cerrone, for example.
Yeah.
Jacare is another example. Maybe he held the belt again, but anyway, the point is Masvidal is going to be one of those guys. Diaz is going to be one of those guys that should be in the Hall of Fame and aren't going to be a UFC champion. And you want to keep those guys to as little as possible, but I think both those guys make it. So why not, again, inaugurate the 165-pound title and give one of them that prop as well to boost their career? Either one of them, it wouldn't be surprising, a la Bisping or someone like that. You put in the work, you have 40 fights, you're dangerous to anyone on any given occasion if it goes your way. And those guys, you can make title shots like that, I think. And I think that nobody will really overly criticize them, except for, the guys who think they deserve to be in the title picture above them, guys, like guys who recently beat Masvidal, guys, like that. Even the thing is at 165, that also immediately puts Conor in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be a weight that he could actually make and perform well and still be big at.
Right now the UFC's at a crossroads with a lot of X factors, and I don't think they'll do the right thing on every single occasion here. I think the right thing to do is you make Masvidal Diaz for the 165-pound title in Super Bowl weekend or something like, if you want to wait, you do it July 4th or whatever, and you blow that up beyond, any shadow of a doubt. Nate wins, you retire the BMF belt. Masvidal wins, you keep the BMF belt around for a fight with Nick.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that idea. I think, I hope at some point Dana tunes into this. Yeah, right. He's sitting around waiting on what we say. But yeah, I hope he tunes into that and says, that's a great idea. And I think that's exactly what we're going to do, because if he did, it would be first of all, the return of Nick Diaz, if it ever happens, and it's got to happen at some point, one would think, then the return of Nick Diaz has to be one of the biggest pay-per-view sells of all time if they put the right opponent with him. which I'm thinking they would want him to do GSP, which I don't care about, and I don't ever want to see George fight again. It's just not my thing. But you know, like Nate said, they ask him in the post fight. You know, what about
belt will bring the wolves out.
A 165-pound belt will bring everybody foaming at the mouth.
GSP will be there, you know, begging, and with his resume, he's hard to hold off. But I would send him into a fight with Khabib. You know,
at 165.
You know, if that's what they want to do it at, they can fight that, and then the winner can fight, you know, the guy who's got the belt there. If you're going to do that championship, if not, you know, he looks like he's ready to make 155, and then, you know, at the end of the day, at some point, you know, GSP is gonna move the radar and want to be involved in there. So that makes things interesting. But could you go? You know, now, you know, you may have tapped that. You know, what I was wondering, where could Dana be thinking? And I thought, you know, Leon Edwards in London.
Yeah, I mean, that's obvious.
And I thought, you know, but I you know, the St. Pierre option didn't cross my mind until you just mentioned it. And St. Pierre is another one of those guys with a drawing power.
His pedigree allows him to do whatever he wants, right?
Yeah, at this point, you know, he doesn't need to say no to anything he doesn't want to do. And at this point, you know, Masvidal would be an appealing fight to St. Pierre. Masvidal's, you know, as a wrestler, that might be the one thing where if you can get George and control him, that might be the one thing where, you know, George, you know, has been submitted. He's got good ground game, and I trust him on the ground. But, you know, Toby Mata's finished him. Joe Loazon's finished him. Once you get to like upper shelf guys, you know, yeah, I think St. Pierre would think his skill set is a good matchup for either of those guys.
Yeah, definitely. I want to see, if St. Pierre comes back, I want to see him fight Nick. I don't want to see him fight Nate, because with Nate, St. Pierre is a big enough man that to me, here's what I learned about Nate Diaz at 170 pounds Saturday night. He's too small to fight at 170. Period. George is not. George looked so much bigger than him once, and they were actually saying before the fight, well, you know, during the weigh-ins, we thought George was the bigger man, but it turns out that he's really not, that Nate has quite a bit of reach and height on him, and that Nate's actually the bigger man of the two. And that's not the case at all. We saw that clearly. I mean, George ragdolled him. He threw him around any way he wanted to go. He punched him way harder. When Nate punched back, Nate has to put punches in bunches in order to kind of flurry and make a guy kind of not see, and then catch him with something sneaky, a liver shot or whatever. Whereas George was fast enough, and he's good enough with his hands. When he kicked Nate, every time he kicked him, it sounded like something broke in Nate's body. Like, God, that's going to hurt for a month, you know? And,
yeah, he picked a couple of spots.
He's a bad man, but I think George just manhandled him and outboxed him in every way. Okay, just put it this way. If that were a 3-round fight, there's one round that would have been a 10-8 round in the second round, I think. And then the first and third rounds would have been 10-9 rounds, all for George. And George would have walked away easily with that, with a 3-round fight. Now, we all understand that the Diaz brothers, kind of cold starters, they warm up. They run the marathon, they fight the fight, and they make sure they drag him into deep waters, and they try to finish him. Nate did that to Conor the first time. Conor wasn't prepared for it at all. But what it said to me more than anything else is that Nate belongs at 155 pounds. At 165, I say okay. But at 170, he's just too small for that. You know, he's a gangly, you know the guy's not in the gym. Like they showed him in the gym lifting weights in one of the pre-fight shows, and I was laughing at it. Like, this guy's probably never lifted weights in his life. I mean, he couldn't care less about that kind of stuff. And I know he works out, but you know, he's an endurance athlete. That's what he does. And that's how he wins fights, is through endurance. And good for him. He's great at it. He's a great fighter. But I want to see GSP fight Nick or George Masvidal. I would like to see that. I'd like to see George Masvidal fight Nate before anything else happens. And I don't think that's going to happen. And Nate called Dana out on it right after the post fight and said, he's already started. That's how it happens. Well, we don't know yet. We've got a lot of options. Well, why wouldn't they run that immediately back and do the BMF fight again and hit it on Super Bowl weekend, like you said, or hit it in mid-February when everybody has cabin fever and you're going crazy and there's nothing going on and the Super Bowl's over. Hit it the weekend after the Super Bowl when there's nothing. There's no more Pro Bowls anymore. There's nothing. There's nothing there. That dead spot was always my best. I never went against playoffs because back then we had a good team in Indianapolis with Peyton Manning. So I never went against playoffs, especially if the Colts were having a good season. But even if they weren't, I didn't go against it. I remember Dave Strasser's show in Wisconsin in Racine. We used to go up there and we would be watching the playoffs. Usually the Packers were in it because they had Favre. And we'd be in the hotel room watching the playoff games and the wild cards before we went to Strasser's show. And we would get there late sometimes because the game wouldn't be over yet. And we'd be like, God damn it, we want to finish the football game first. There are certain things you just don't go against. And I think Canelo Alvarez proves that perfectly. And the UFC has got the perfect opportunity, if they capitalize on it right now, to do all of these freak fights they wanted to do. And they could do them all in one night on one show and have the biggest, most incredible pay-per-view viewer sellout show since the days of Pride when they sold 90,000 tickets, and what's his name parachuted into the ring. I mean, it could be utterly amazing. And I'd love that. I'm okay with that. I'm a promoter. I'm not a matchmaker. I'm not a purist. I want to see entertainment. I want to be entertained.
Mixed martial entertainment where every fight is a cage fight.
Yeah, man. And just make it fucking crazy. I love that.
Here's the thing.
I don't like wrestling.
Let me give you example from the history of MMA that the UFC and the boxing commissions are probably too square to do this. The UFC could go off and say, look, we're going to do a show in Wyoming or somewhere without a sanctioning body, on a cruise ship or in Russia where they'll do whatever we want or whatever. But go back to the Sakuraba Royce Gracie match. Royce Gracie's return to the sport was a major deal, and it really literally has the similar problem to Nate Diaz and Nick, and that is the old story is that their style is going to be to wear you down, and any time limit of any type is something that they're not going to be philosophically with, that they'd rather avoid. So start with, you're going to do rounds, then, they got to get it to the ground 5 times if they're going to provide 5 rounds or whatever it is. All of that's against what they want to do. But you kind of got to do rounds and stuff like that. But why not go ahead and, 6, 7, let it do the Sakuraba Royce Gracie thing and just keep the rounds going with an open end. So that way there must be a definitive finish. I think that gimmick.
It's got to be baptized.
Yeah, I think that gimmick is something that it's been long, but almost to a T. I would think if there's 5% of the MMA fans in the United States that remember Sakuraba and Royce Gracie's fight and the gravitas of that fight and the fact that they made new rules, and these were 10-minute rounds. They did 9 10-minute rounds, folks, for those who want to look at it.
It's amazing.
So I think that this would be a situation where I think that then you don't need the BMF belt. Just that type of open time limit, that means these guys are the baddest. People will say it for you. You don't have to tell people these are the baddest motherfuckers. They'll say it for you. And I think a gimmick like that, I would be open for. I don't know that the culture of American MMA is open for it. I'll give you another gimmick that I found to be fascinating. I think I would definitely pay to see, and I think that it would be a crossover thing. And this comes from the 1790s and rules in a women's MMA fight that were documented back then. It would have been a boxing pugilism type of fight, but it turns out to be MMA because there were really no rules back then, right? And the point is each woman had a coin in her hand, and they just slobber knocked each other until the first one who dropped the coin. If you can't hold on to the coin, you can't continue the fight. That was the marker, right? So I think those types of things would be the type of attention getters that don't really change much of the way the fight's going to go down. I think that, well, let me get not the pure techniques and stuff. Yeah, the fight's going to change because of its open time limit. The guys will structure that into their strategies and stuff. But that's what I want to see. I want to see the sport blossoming that way. I don't want to see, that the difference or the new thing is like, ooh, did you see that, the Rock and Stone Cold were there? Meaningless. That's social media shit. Social media shit. And, gimmicks will sell, and I'm all right with gimmicky, selling that. But give me something for real. Because if it's going to be another 5-round fight under Vegas Commission rules or California Commission rules, you're going to be subject to a doctor at some point saying, man, it's on me. I can't let him go on because I really feel that way. Or whatever else might happen. You know what I mean? So I think if you're going to hype it that way, you got to put some real, juice to it. And I think something with meat. And I think, that goes with more than just being able to say, The Rock gave him the belt. That's not what I mean by, edgy or doing something new or stuff like that. Although obviously it's the first time The Rock's been in, it's like, it's one of the reasons why, that was not going to be my path of being like a huge person in the MMA business, because it really, someone would say, it's like, we'll bring The Rock to give him the belt. And I would literally ask why. Why would I even bother to pay for a hotel room for the guy, Yeah. And it comes with so much more than that, right?
Yeah. So there's the private jets and all the,
or maybe he doesn't. Maybe again, and he's another guy that Dana describes as a friend, right? So maybe there's there's some way that everybody's making money on that. But that's the point. Is let's funnel the money to Nick and Nate and not Nick and Nate, George and Nate.
Yeah,
the guys actually doing the fighting. It's like I don't need The Rock to go home with a paycheck for this fight. It's like it doesn't interest me to butter his bread. You know what I mean? It's like, let's just keep it to that. Let's leave it in the ring, and let's leave it open time limit.
The only other thing that could be bigger than that, and that could still be kind of a sideshow circus act, is let's get The Rock in there and let him fight Brock Lesnar. Let's do that. I want to see that. I would watch that any day of the week. I would watch that. I would pay $100 for that pay-per-view.
Somebody out there, hopefully some weirdo MMA kid, if that ever happens, some weird MMA kid that still lives in his mother's basement, pulls a John Hinckley or, just and takes him out before it happens, man. I can't handle it.
Oh my God. Well, with that, it's been an interesting conversation. I did feel like it was gratifying watching George after all these years of knowing him somewhat personally. You more so than myself, but I've spoken to George. I've trained with him. I've been around him a lot. I watched his first AFC fight, and I'll never forget. We had the Razor phones, and you flipped your Razor phone open, and you showed pictures of George, and this kid's gonna fight for us, and I think maybe you had to bring up the camera and open the camera up and show the 30-second clip of him, because I don't think YouTube was available yet.
Well, yeah,
I don't think we could get videos on our phones yet. I forget how that went, but it's been that long ago that George has been fighting. He was a kid. He was a kid like Thiago Alves. They were just kids, man. They had to have their parents come in and sign off and stuff.
George you know, he's still a young man. He's still got some years left, and that's because he's been around for so long. He's got some of that experience. And this weekend, to me, I was very gratified because I did personally feel that he was a guy that I kept on board and kept him with contracts and tried to keep him on because I thought that he was a critical piece for a 155-pound division at some point down the line. Now it's 16 years later, and it's interesting to think it takes that long. You know what I mean? For him to finally be at that doorstep, I think he's definitely a guy that paid his dues. And I think that the interesting thing is you know, with your hats off to the 21st century, at the end of the day, you could be old school, you could be whatever you want, but we're in the 21st century, and I think, you know, you could be, you know, Max Holloway is an incredible fighter.
Absolutely.
He doesn't move the radar like George does.
He doesn't. Well, Miguel, he's not getting the hits on YouTube. He's not getting the Twitter feed. He's not getting Instagram, you know?
That's what I'm talking about in terms of, you know, maybe it takes 16 years to do the total package and get it all together like that. Because George is clicking right now on all cylinders. You know what I mean?
I don't agree with that because Conor McGregor did it in 16 months.
Yeah, but you know,
Ronda Rousey did it in 2 years. I mean, you know how
I'll tell you the difference.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. Everybody's their own path, right? But I'll tell you the difference there is, you know, Ronda came to the UFC and was a UFC 135-pound champion, signed, sealed, and delivered with a belt before she did a UFC fight.
Right.
So she was the chosen one for a certain path, women's MMA, and to blow the whole thing up. And she was the right personality-wise, love or hate her. It all worked out well.
Well,
but McGregor too. McGregor came on board with the UFC. You know, started winning fights. The personality clicked. They realized, you know, that the nationality, that the Irish branding would click, and that the guy could be out of this world and stuff. George is more responsible for his own right. You know, he didn't have
right. Agreed.
So that's why
he didn't have any gimmicks.
Yeah, that's why I think, you know, you do have to give it, you know, the 16 years, like social media now. I remember him being very quiet too. You know, he wasn't a big talker and stuff like that. He'll trash talk, and you know, he was always good for a quote. I remember he was fighting a guy named Steve Berger, who was a UFC veteran.
Wow.
I think he gave Robbie Lawler a great UFC fight once upon a time around UFC 36 or something like that. But anyway, the point is his quote with Steve Berger, it always stuck with me, was like, man, Steve's going to feel like the ref's punching him too. You know what I mean? It's like, so, you know, he was always great for quotes like that, but quiet, a watcher, very much guy that guided by his mentors, did what he was told to do by his guys and stuff like that. Not a guy who, you know, allowed things to be complicated. But, you know, sometimes those quiet guys, I just like to fight, you know, kind of guys, they got to make that change. Now, you know, on social media, they're you know, thinking back and stuff. One of the videos that he did was actually talked about the only fight he was ever afraid going into it. That was against Steve Edwards. And, so it's like I remember making a phone call to make that fight, you know?
Yeah.
And I talked to Marcelo Tigre, I think, at that point, which was the kickboxing coach he had there. And that
was in Trenton, New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. And it was so it's interesting to me, but when you go back 10 years for him to look at that fight, stuff like that, he's been through a lot, and he's got a great mindset and a great perspective on things. You know what I mean? And now I think his confidence is well placed. You know, I think it could be disrespectful. No, I saw it as a very interesting thing when, you know, after beating Askren, he just said he's a bum because he wasn't impressed. He was not a mixed martial artist. He was not a guy who had done everything that George had done and stuff like that. So George, at this point, can look back at his body of work, and he doesn't have to be ashamed holding it up against anybody. Losses be damned and stuff like that. What he's been through, for the length of time he's been through, for the length of it, the focus and everything like that, he deserves everything that's coming to him. You know, so hopefully it continues. And I think he's got a chance. You know, if the right things happen, even if you match him tough, You know, you can Leon Edwards in London won't be an easy fight. You know,
No, not at all.
Nate, I think Nate will go his way if things, you know, don't go completely. And it needs to go his way so you get to the Nick fight. The Nick fight will be interesting because Nick fought Frank Shamrock in the day. You know, Nick is
but Miguel, listen. What about this though? If there was never a 3-piece in a soda, we wouldn't be talking about Leon Edwards right now. He would be an undercard guy on a prelim, like he was.
That's not true because
he's a really good fighter. He's witty. He's smart. He's well spoken. You know, he's got he's got a very odd style about him. His wrestling is inconceivable. It's hard for anyone to catch him. We don't really know what his jiu-jitsu is necessarily. We haven't seen it.
He's British, which he comes from an appealing market and stuff like that. So that's why I think you could do that fight. But yeah, you're right. George made that incident. You know,
yeah, he made Leon Edwards somebody we know.
And I think, you know, here the bottom line to me is this: I think that's what comes with being savvy and being 15 years in the sport. Yeah. George was supposed to go to England and lose that fight to Darren Till. That was the script the UFC wanted to go down.
Yep.
And he messed that up for them. Now, but he's also a guy. Now, I'm gonna guess that when you get to London for a fight, you do see a different level. The British fighters carry themselves a little bit different, you know, a little bit of confidence, a little bit of a different respect for the fighters over there. You know, I know, a lot of that comes from boxing and things like that, but I think you saw a whole different world there. I think, you know, the fact is when you got dollars and you're changing them to pounds, the pound, it's good to get, you know, anytime you could do business in London and England for your fighting instead of, hey, you're going to headline Nashville, you know, or anything like that. Give me London every time. So I think George made a very calculated move there in calling out a Brit, and it didn't need to be McGregor at that point because, you know, that's a long line to get on. You know what I mean?
Right,
so I think organically, like I said, they didn't do anything with George. George has created himself and put himself in those positions, and in this case, he made Leon Edwards for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so we'll see if that's where they go. They have that as a fallback fight, but that's probably the least monetizing of the fight. And again, we're talking about London full blown, right? But
I just think I think they're crazy if they don't come right back and do Masvidal and Diaz again. I think you're going to have fans that are going to be screaming about that. And at some point, man, they've got to give Nate a little respect. I mean, come on. The guy's been around. He's got 40 fights or whatever. It's just crazy. It's wrong. And at some point, the UFC, by doing that, at some point, they are going to start to cut their own throats if they don't start to respect some of the fighters that have been around a long time, like George, like Nate, like Nick, and that list just goes on and on and on. We could talk about that for days. So, you know, if they don't do that and they just keep on bringing up, you know, the new face that did something popular at that moment, because all they're really doing right now is they're counting clicks.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing.
Is that this has, you know, the potential to be the storyline throughout all of next year as well. You can build it. You can start to build on stuff like that, and that's one of the things that they've been lacking. They've been kind of like going for that one shot. You know, Brock coming back or whatever it is. You know, since Rousey, and you know, they can't count on McGregor 100%. You know, for twice a year anymore.
Yeah, where's Frazier and Ali? Where's the Sugar Ray fights at? You know, when you look at the old boxing fights, you know, where's the No Moss fight? Where speaking of Roberto Duran, who I got to meet Roberto in Panama City, Panama in 2008, maybe 2007. I forget what it was. And like, I just remember being mesmerized that I was in the same room shaking hands with this guy with this massive Rolex on, and you know, everybody around him, you know, I mean, he's Panamanian. And so, you know, it was like being with the superstar of the world. And like, I immediately came home and sent money down to a gym that he sponsored and helped them buy bags and new rings and stuff from my promotion. And it was overwhelming to be around that. And so maybe the UFC needs a little bit more of that. Maybe they need to bring back, maybe Randy needs to corner somebody. Maybe that's what needs to happen, Maybe they need to bring Randy back. I don't want to see that. But I'm just saying something like that, instead of having The Rock put that on, why not have
it should.
Why not have Fedor? Why not have Fedor pin it on him? I mean, Fedor's not the UFC guy, but
it should have been DJ Penn, right? I mean, Penn's the guy right in those weight classes that was the first guy to do the 2 weight classes and stuff. Even if he's got a 500 record at this point in his career, he's still the legendary guy from a certain time frame. His name still evokes that stuff, but he's a head case and he can't do it. So yeah, I'm all for some of the nostalgia and stuff to come back, and I think that they are shorting some of their fighters. You know what I mean? It's like and it's a nice way to bring some people back. Like even for a middleweight title fight, Dave Monet is a completely forgotten man. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think he's also a guy who's kind of quiet and doesn't need the attention.
That's an understatement.
But extend the olive branch. Call him up and say, look, we're Adesanya and whoever he fights next is going to be a huge middleweight fight. We're going to redesign the belts. Why don't you come in as the first middleweight champion and give the belt to the new guy?
Right, right.
And that way they can get him a payday. Have people remember his legacy and stuff like that. They do very nothing of that with that.
Nothing at all. They could care less.
Instead, Dave's like, well, I'm friends with The Rock.
See that's the whole problem with you as a matchmaker versus me as a promoter. As a promoter, I would be doing exactly what they're doing, except I would extend it and go even more bizarre and more crazy with it. Because I would extend all of the. I would make rubber matches anywhere I could, because rubber matches always sell if you can get the rubber match. So, I mean, what happens if Nate comes out and in 30 seconds he throws a flying knee and knocks out George? Now you've got a rubber match that's going to be the biggest fight the UFC's ever seen. And then George goes out there and beats Nate to a bloody pulp and then says, bring on the next one. Bring on the next one. And Nick steps in the ring. Now you have this massive storyline. And like you said, all of 2020 is now filled with that. So now your 170-pound becomes 165-pound. It's filled in all the way through so that it gets tons of attention. And then maybe you even use Askren one more time. He's talking about retiring, I think he figured out, wow, there's a whole new level of fighting here that I wasn't aware of. And I'm shocked anyone picked Askren personally for that fight. I said from Jump Street, I said, well, Maya's going to choke him out. I mean, he's going to get his back and he's going to choke him. It's pretty obvious. I was shocked anyone picked Askren. Sorry to say, because I know a lot of people did. But anyways, my point is that you have to run with what's there and you got to dance with what brought you. And I get all of that. But there's a way that you're talking about that integrates both of them so that it allows you to now integrate this into the 165-pound belt. And I love that. I think that's a great idea. While you're doing it, get everything you can out of it to make the 165 inauguration really something special. And I think if they did that, you bring out GSP and Nick Diaz for a fight, and then whoever wins fights Masvidal versus Nate 2 or 3 or however that works out. And you could have the storylines are just endless. They're endless. And that's what they're looking for, storylines. And it's like the UFC we're just going to cut our own heads off again because there's a great storyline we missed. And I slap myself every time. Like I do an eye roll and slap my forehead every time I I see them miss the storyline. I'm like, you got a storyline right there that could last. You could get 8 fucking fights out of that total with all the people that are gathered around that in the periphery. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, you want to make money. You want to do it the easiest way possible. You want social media to sell the fight for you, which is what happened on this one. They didn't do all that much to sell this. They let social media sell it with clickbait. I just don't get it. I mean, look, they're the UFC and I'm not, so I obviously I'm wrong and they're right. But I don't understand it as a promoter. I mean, I know what I do, and I know every time I did stuff like that, you know, I didn't have any tickets left. I couldn't get any more people in. You know, I was breaking every fire code there was, and creating seats where there weren't any, and letting people stand behind bars, selling them tickets to stand behind the bar and watch the fight. I mean,
that would be very convenient.
You know, I mean, it just for you know, those were older days.
It wouldn't be difficult to find a matchmaker around those days. So,
anyway, it's been fun, man.
Yep, definitely. You know, Masvidal made it fun. It was a good weekend, and it was a weekend where, you know, with the personal connection we have to the kid, and he's not a kid anymore. He's a man. He's doing the man.
Way to go, George. Proud of you, man.
Yeah, I'm very happy for him. You know, he's one of the guys I'd like to say that, you know, they definitely put in the work and deserves it. You know, and I believe at the end of the day, too, that you're talking about a kid who probably martial arts and MMA and stuff, you know, kept him out of jail, did you know, changed his life. So he's about ready to put his daughters through college, you know, with the paychecks he's going to cash here and stuff. So more power to him. Hopefully he keeps it going. Hopefully the UFC, you know, recognizes what they have here. And my main argument and my main problem, and I, you know, this is where the philosophy ends. I think most promoters don't have my philosophy, right? But I think that the point to me is that when you gear something, you know, for a major jump like we're going to go to 4 million pay-per-views because we're going to get so much eyes on this. You know, if things go wrong on that presentation, then you've turned off a lot of people.
Yeah.
And what happens is with those huge peaks, then those valleys come, and the UFC sometimes is left with good pay-per-views that they sold 150,000 for. You know, and I'm not, you know, I don't have empirical data to prove it, but my gut feeling is that with a more consistent product that doesn't set you up for failure, like do a BMF title that gets stopped by a doctor, how not BMF is that, you know? So, like, you know, when you can mitigate that type of disappointment a little bit and deliver a more consistent product across the board, not overstep your bounds, you know? I think in the long run that pays off, but unfortunately, you don't have too many people that run that model. You know, everybody will always opt for, hey, we could double our revenue for next show, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about the difference between politically the Obama administration's economic policy versus the Trump administration's economic policy. You come in, you slice taxes on the rich, and you know, the market goes crazy for a little while. You get a bear market, and then you get a bull market, or bull market and a bear market, and you know, versus slow, steady climbing inclinations of economic status where you get slow growth. And with slow growth, you can afford to do the right things at the right time. And you might even make the argument that Bellator is still here because they've grown so slowly. They put the money in the right things at the right time. And even if they're still very B class, and I would even say C plus class most of the time, if not D a lot of times, they're still around for a good reason. They're still around because no one else has been able to come in and supersede what Bellator's done to be second place. And you can't tell me there aren't hundreds of shows out there that would love to be second place, you know?
Yeah, I think at a worldwide level, one's past Bellator. You know, the fact is,
I think so too.
with the markets they have, we don't see them as much here.
Yeah.
I'd rather headline Shanghai than Thackerville, Oklahoma. Where
For sure. So, yeah, I agree. But I'm kind of speaking from an American perspective. You know, obviously.
Bellator, if you consider, Patricky Vipple, Gegard Mousasi, Douglas Lima, they've crowned some champions that are pretty legit
MVP
and stuff like that. Yeah, they got guys that are homegrown and interesting. The problem with that is that those guys on their own shows play second fiddle to the geriatric group, and they don't know how to market.
Yeah, they can't get over that. They can't get over the legends idea.
They don't. The UFC. I don't think the UFC even worries about Bellator at this point.
No, they're not. It's not like they're going, oh, we can't put on a show the same day as Bellator.
Yeah, no, even, we might lose a guy to Bellator. Let him go over there and fuck his career up. I think that'll be
go ahead. Go into oblivion. Bellator's paying him well, and I'm grateful Bellator is there for a guy like
all of them.
Let's say Leon Edwards. There's a guy who Bellator could easily take on if George goes over there and makes a joke of him. If George makes a fool of Leon Edwards and then he loses one more fight after that, UFC cuts him because he's worthless. They can't get anything out of him. And he has to go to Bellator then, or one, and he probably goes to one because he's in Europe, but you know what I mean?
Yeah,
the whole idea that I'm glad that Ryan's over there, making a living at Bellator and doing well and taking, let's face it, relatively easy fights in comparison to what he would be taking in the UFC, because the UFC's got all the wolves and Bellator's got, the old dogs.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. The thing is, Bellator tends towards that, splash marketing that I'm against. You know what I mean? I think they really make a mistake by putting their geriatric fight over their title fights and stuff like that. They've done a good job with the Grand Prix. The fact is that 170-pound Grand Prix leaves Douglas Lima probably a top 5 welterweight in the world, UFC included. So they've got some time.
I'd argue against that, but yeah, he's pretty damn good.
But they just, they're disconnected. Nobody even has those conversations. There's no chance of them doing the fight, Bellator versus UFC or anything like that. So it just becomes a moot point, and they fade into that. Masvidal and Diaz are not going to fade though. So we'll see. We'll see how fast things start getting decided. We'll keep an eye on this for everybody here at the CRP. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. It's been a long podcast, but obviously Masvidal and Diaz has the potential of being the highest purchased pay-per-view of the year, so definitely warranted some time. I love getting together with Chadillac because we don't talk just about the in-ring stuff. We get into business talk and things like that, which always becomes very interesting. A lot of possibilities here, and we're definitely at a crossroads where the UFC has, could do the right thing here on a number of fronts, but will they? Anyway, any final words, Chad?
I think you wrapped it up perfectly. Will they? Let's see.
And I'm Miguel Durrani, and that's Chadillac for the CRP. Masvidal and Diaz fallout for you right here.